"Officer, my name is Camille Hartwell. I'm the new district attorney of Harrow County. My credentials are inside this envelope." Officer Travis Kessler did not respond. He snatched the brown envelope from Camille's hand, pulled out her documents, and dropped them as though they were garbage, without even bothering to examine them. Camille stood silently on the gravel shoulder of Route 9, still dressed in the suit she had chosen for one of the most important days of her life. Her expression revealed nothing. Her phone remained in her hand, still recording. A few feet away, her husband stood in his good clothes, with his wrists locked in handcuffs while passing vehicles slowed so their occupants could stare. What Travis Kessler did not understand was that the woman standing calmly in front of him was now the one person in Harrow County with enough legal authority to bring his entire career to an end. Before continuing, comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And make sure you subscribe, because the next story is one you won't want to miss. The morning had felt like a promise. Camille Hartwell had awakened long before she needed to, not because she was nervous. At least, not exactly. Some mornings simply carried too much importance to sleep through. She had lain quietly beside her husband, listening to the familiar sounds of their home and thinking about everything that had brought her to this day. Years of struggle, law school on almost no money, 70-hour work weeks, cases nobody else wanted, courtrooms where the odds often seemed stacked against her before she ever opened her mouth. All of it had been leading here. Standing before the bathroom mirror, Camille pinned a small American flag to the lapel of her charcoal blazer. Her fingers were steady. Her eyes were clear. At 42, Camille Hartwell looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had decided a long time ago that she was not going to lose. Darius was already downstairs making coffee when she entered the kitchen. I was 44, broad-shouldered, warm-faced, with the kind of calm presence that had always anchored her whenever the world became too loud. He looked up and gave her the smile she had married him for. "You look like a district attorney." "That's because I am one." He laughed. She accepted the coffee he handed her, and for one quiet moment, everything in the world seemed exactly right. When they were ready to leave, Darius held out his hand for the keys. "Let me drive," he said. "It's your big day. Sit back and enjoy it." Camille looked at his hand, then at him. "The last time you drove my car, you spent 20 minutes looking for a parking space and still managed to park crooked. That parking lot had terrible markings. Darius, the lines were bright yellow." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Camille walked past him and climbed into the driver's seat. The new silver Cadillac Escalade was spotless, still carrying the faint smell of the dealership as she guided it onto the 2-lane stretch of Route 9. The Georgia morning was cool and sharp. Golden light filtered through the trees lining both sides of the road. The courthouse was only a few miles away. On the back seat rested a thick brown envelope. Inside were Camille's official appointment letter, her bar credentials, and her state-issued identification. Everything she needed for the swearing-in ceremony. She had checked the envelope several times before they left. Darius had caught her and had been teasing her ever since. "You checked that envelope again." "I did not." "You did. It's an important envelope, Darius. It's sitting right there on the back seat, Camille. Exactly where it was a moment ago." She kept her eyes on the road so he would not see her smile. This was them. It had always been them. His steadiness balancing her intensity. His ease cutting through her focus. 18 years of marriage. At a red light, she reached across and rested her hand briefly on his arm. He covered it with his own without saying anything. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready." She paused. For a long time, he nodded. I knew. He had been beside her through all of it. They continued in comfortable silence. The road was quiet. A few trucks passed. A school bus traveled in the opposite direction. It was the kind of ordinary morning that gave no warning about what was coming. Then blue lights appeared in Camille's rearview mirror, flashing. Close behind her. She looked automatically at the speedometer. She was traveling below the posted limit. She had not run a red light. She had not changed lanes without signaling. She had done nothing wrong. Still, a familiar cold moved through the car. The particular kind of cold that black people in America recognize deep in their bones. It settled over both Camille and Darius instantly. After 18 years of marriage, they did not need to explain that feeling to each other. They experienced it at the same moment, in the same way, and understood. Beside her, Darius slowly straightened in his seat. His jaw tightened. Camille kept both hands steady on the steering wheel. She guided the Escalade carefully onto the gravel shoulder, slowly, deliberately, the way a person moves when someone is watching every action, and she wants absolutely no possibility of her intentions being misunderstood. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. Blue lights continued to spin behind them. Neither of them spoke. In the rearview mirror, Camille watched the patrol car door open. The officer who stepped out was broad, white, and unhurried. He adjusted his duty belt before walking toward them. There was something about the way he moved, the confidence of a certain kind of man who had already decided how an encounter would unfold before he ever reached the window. Badge number 1147 caught the sunlight as he approached. Camille watched him. Her hand moved slowly toward her phone. The officer offered no greeting. At first, he said nothing at all. He simply stood beside the driver's window with his thumbs hooked into his belt and studied the vehicle as if he had already decided it belonged to someone else. His eyes moved across the dashboard, then toward the back seat, then toward Darius. Finally, they settled on Camille. "This vehicle was reported stolen," he said. "Step out of the car. No introduction. No, ma'am. No request for her license or registration. Just a declaration delivered like a verdict." Camille kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. Her voice remained smooth and level. "I'm sorry, officer, but that isn't possible. This vehicle belongs to me. I purchased it 11 days ago." Without breaking eye contact, she indicated the back seat. "My documentation is inside that brown envelope." Kessler did not look at the envelope. He kept looking at her. "I said step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Darius shifted slightly in the passenger seat. "Officer, there has to be some mistake. This is our car, sir." Kessler's eyes snapped toward him. "I'm not talking to you. Keep your hands where I can see them, and do not reach for anything." Anything. The word landed hard. Deliberate. Almost as though Kessler were already constructing a different version of the encounter inside his head. A version in which Darius was dangerous, the vehicle was stolen, and everything about the moment justified whatever the officer chose to do next. Camille felt that cold again, deeper now. She slowly moved one hand toward the door handle. Every movement was measured, visible, controlled. She opened the door and stepped onto the gravel, standing straight in her charcoal blazer, the small American flag on her lapel catching the morning light. She faced Kessler and kept her chin level. "Officer, my name is Camille Hartwell. I am the newly elected district attorney of Harrove County. My swearing-in ceremony is this morning." Her tone remained professional, firm. "I have my official appointment letter, my bar credentials, and my state-issued identification inside the brown envelope on the back seat. I would like to retrieve them so we can clear this up." Something crossed Kessler's face. Not recognition, not doubt, more like irritation. The expression of a man annoyed that someone was taking longer than expected to obey him. "I don't care what you say you are," he replied. "The plate on this vehicle came back flagged as stolen. That's all I need." He reached for his radio. "I'm calling for backup." "You're calling for backup?" Camille repeated quietly. almost to herself. Then she moved toward the rear of the Escalade. For a moment, she simply watched him. The way a person studies something she knows she may need to remember perfectly later. The angle of his jaw, the flatness in his eyes, the complete absence of uncertainty in his posture, as though the possibility that he could be wrong had never crossed his mind. Through the vehicle's rear window, Camille could see Darius still sitting in the passenger seat. His hands rested openly on his knees, visible, unthreatening. He held himself with the careful, practiced stillness of a black man who understood exactly what kind of encounter this was, and how quickly it could become something worse. After 18 years of marriage, seeing him like that still turned her stomach. Camille reached toward the side pocket of her jacket. Slowly, her fingers closed around her phone. She pulled it out where Kessler could clearly see it. Then she opened the camera, pressed record. A small red indicator appeared. Kessler noticed immediately. His eyes dropped toward the phone, then returned to her face. "You recording me?" "Yes, sir." "Put that away." "I'm standing on a public road," Camille replied. "I have the right to record this interaction." For one brief moment, something flickered behind Kessler's eyes. Not guilt, not shame, calculation. I was reconsidering something. Then he turned away and spoke into his radio. Camille kept the camera steady. Her hand did not tremble. Her face did not break. Her eyes remained fixed on badge number 1147. She burned it into her memory like a brand, because standing on the gravel shoulder of Route 9, in the blazer she had intended to wear while taking her oath of office, with her husband frozen inside the passenger seat and blue lights spinning behind them, Camille already understood something. This moment was not going to end on the side of this road, not even close. The radio crackled. Kessler spoke quietly into the receiver attached near his shoulder. Camille heard fragments. Possible stolen vehicle. Route 9. Requesting backup. Backup for a license plate check. Camille kept recording. She stated the location into the camera. She clearly read badge number 117 aloud the same way she had introduced evidence into court records throughout her career. Carefully, precisely, making sure every word was captured. Through the rear window, Darius remained motionless, both hands still resting openly on his knees. He had not reached for anything, had not moved suddenly, had not spoken since Kessler ordered him to stay quiet. I was doing everything correctly. Everything black men in America learn to do when a badge and a hostile attitude arrive at a car window, and none of it mattered, because Kessler had already decided what this encounter was going to be. That was the part that burned. After speaking with dispatch, Kessler walked back toward the Escalade. Without warning, he pulled open the passenger door. "Sir, out of the vehicle, now." Darius slowly turned his head. "Is there a reason?" "I won't ask again." The words struck the air like a door slamming. Darius held Kessler's gaze for a single breath. Then he nodded, small, controlled, and stepped out. I moved with textbook caution. The door opened wide. His hands remained slightly raised. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and visible. He stepped onto the gravel and stood straight. I wore a navy pullover and slacks. He looked exactly like what he was. A decent man on his way to watch his wife become district attorney. None of it mattered. Kessler moved suddenly. He seized Darius by the arm, spun him toward the side of the Escalade, and pulled out his handcuffs before Darius could fully react. "What are you?" "Hands behind your back." "I haven't done anything." "Hands." The cuffs snapped closed. Camille's jaw tightened until it hurt, but she kept the phone raised. She kept recording. Her voice remained steady as she narrated. "Officer has placed passenger in handcuffs. No resistance offered, no cause given." Inside, something was being pulled tight, like a wire stretched beyond its limit. That was her husband, standing handcuffed on a public road, wearing his good clothes. On one of the most important mornings of their lives, cars slowed as they passed. A pickup, a minivan. The minivan almost stopped. Camille saw a woman behind the wheel, already holding up her phone. Good, Camille thought. Record everything. Darius stood with his back straight and his chin raised, his hands locked behind him. He said nothing else. That was one of the things about Darius Hartwell. I understood how to carry himself through humiliation. He had learned the hard way, just as Camille had. You did not give people the reaction they expected. You did not fall apart. You stood straight. You remembered who you were, even while someone was doing everything possible to make you forget. But Camille saw his jaw. She knew that jaw. I was holding himself together with everything he had. A second patrol vehicle eventually arrived, its tires crunching across the gravel as its emergency lights flashed. The door opened. Deputy Tessa Munro stepped out. She was 34, dressed in a dark uniform, her natural hair pulled neatly back. She moved around the front of her cruiser with the practiced efficiency of someone who had responded to backup calls countless times and usually knew exactly what she would find. Then she saw Darius, handcuffed beside the silver Escalade. Then she saw Camille standing nearby with a phone recording everything. Tessa stopped, not dramatically. It was simply the brief hesitation that occurs when a person's brain needs a moment to catch up with what her eyes are seeing. She recognized Camille. Everyone in the department knew her face. Local news coverage of the election had shown Camille standing before a crowd, while the headline announced that she had become the first black woman elected district attorney of Harrow County. The color drained visibly from Tessa's face. She took a step toward Kessler, her mouth opened. Kessler turned toward her. I did not say anything. He only looked at her. One hard, flat glance. But Tessa closed her mouth. Cover the other side, Kessler ordered. She hesitated, only briefly, but Camille noticed, and she filed that moment away beside badge number 1147. Tessa moved to the other side of the vehicle. Camille lowered her phone slightly, not because Kessler had ordered her to, because she had made a decision. She walked to the open rear door, reached inside and retrieved the brown envelope. With her phone still recording in one hand, she held the envelope toward Kessler with the other. Everything you need is inside. My appointment letter, my bar credentials, my state ID. I am the new district attorney of Harrow County, and my husband is standing handcuffed on the side of this road for absolutely no reason. Kessler looked at the envelope as though it had been created specifically to inconvenience him. I took it. Slowly, he pulled out the documents and examined them with the unhurried attitude of a man who had already made up his mind and was reviewing evidence only because he had been forced to. Camille watched his face. She saw the exact moment he understood. The official county seal, her name, the words District Attorney, Harrow County, State of Georgia, her bar credentials bearing the state seal, her state-issued ID, her own photograph, staring back at him from the card in his hand. The change in his expression was tiny, almost nothing. A tightening around the eyes. A muscle in his jaw moved once, then stopped. That was all. A hay line crack in the wall before stubbornness sealed it again. The vehicle is still flagged, he said. He handed the documents back without meeting her eyes. I'm doing my job. You're doing your job? Camille repeated. That's what I said. Then do it completely. Contact dispatch and verify the VIN. Kessler's eyes snapped toward her. He looked offended by the instruction itself, as though no one had ever told him how to conduct a traffic stop before. Camille held his gaze. She did not blink. Eventually, he contacted dispatch. Camille watched the recording timer while they waited. Darius remained in handcuffs on the shoulder of Route 9. More vehicles slowed as they passed. Kessler leaned against the hood of his cruiser with his arms folded, performing patience as though he were the one being inconvenienced. Tessa remained near the far side of the Escalade. She avoided Camille's eyes, but Camille noticed something else. Tessa had positioned herself so that her body camera faced exactly where it needed to face. Then, the radio crackled. Dispatch responded clearly through the static. The VIN on the Escalade did not correspond to any stolen vehicle in the system. The alert had been generated by a clerical entry error inside the sheriff's department. The Escalade was legally registered to Camille Hartwell of Harrow County. The stolen vehicle report was invalid. Kessler straightened. For a moment, he simply stood there with the radio in his hand. Then he walked toward Darius. He pulled out a key, unlocked the handcuffs. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that Darius Hartwell had been standing restrained beside a public highway despite having committed no offense. Only the mechanical click of the cuffs opening. Then Kessler stepped away. Darius slowly rubbed his wrists. His expression remained controlled, but Camille could see the marks left behind, where the metal had pressed into his skin. Something deep inside her tightened so violently that it almost stole her breath. Kessler walked back and held out the brown envelope. "You're free to go." That was all. No title, no apology, no acknowledgement of anything that had happened. He had already begun turning away before Camille even took the envelope. She allowed him to walk several steps. Then she spoke. "Badge number 1." Her voice was quiet, even, precise as a scalpel. "I have all of this on video." Kessler continued walking. He did not turn around, did not slow down. He opened his cruiser door and climbed inside as though this had been an ordinary traffic stop. Camille watched until the door closed. Then she felt a light touch on her arm. She turned. Tessa Munro stood beside her. The deputy's eyes were wide and glassy, filled with something that looked very much like shame. She glanced once toward Kessler's cruiser. Then she looked directly at Camille. Her lips formed two silent words. "I'm sorry." Camille studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, only once, and turned toward Darius. I was already holding the car door open for her. They arrived at the courthouse late. Camille found a parking space and shut off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. They simply sat inside the quiet vehicle. The flashing lights were gone. The gravel shoulder of Route 9 was behind them, but the memory still clung to both of them like a nightmare that refused to fully disappear after waking. Darius reached toward Camille. He carefully straightened the American flag pin on her lapel. His fingers were gentle, the same way they had always been when he touched something that mattered. "You ready?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked earlier, when the road had still been peaceful, but it meant something different now. They both understood that. Camille looked at him, at the faint marks still visible around his wrists. "Yes," she said, and she meant it more deeply now than before. The courthouse room was full. Judges, attorneys, county officials, community members who had traveled from every part of Harrow County to witness the moment. People who had knocked on doors, made phone calls, believed in Camille long before others had believed this day was possible. Every seat was occupied. People stood several rows deep along the back wall. When Camille finally entered with her chin lifted and the American flag pinned to her lapel, the room responded the way rooms sometimes do when something truly important finally arrives. The ceremony itself was brief and exact. Someone made a gentle joke about the delay. Nobody asked what had caused it. Camille placed her left hand on the Bible, raised her right, and spoke the oath of office in a clear, steady voice that carried through the room. She meant every word. When the oath ended, the room erupted. Darius was the first person to reach her. He held her the way he had held her through every difficult thing in 18 years of marriage. Camille allowed herself a few moments inside that embrace. Then she pulled away, smiled at the room, and went to work. Later, after the ceremony crowd had disappeared and the courthouse had settled back into its ordinary rhythm, Camille sat behind the desk in her new office for the first time. Boxes remained stacked against one wall. Her degrees had not yet been hung. The leather chair beneath her still felt unfamiliar. She stared through the window at the city below. A knock sounded. Gideon Shaw entered carrying 2 coffees. I was 48, medium height, with closely cropped gray hair at his temples, and the kind of steady, unhurried presence that caused people to trust him almost immediately. I had served as Camille's chief investigator for 6 years in Atlanta. When Camille returned to Harrow County, Gideon came with her. She had never asked him to. He had simply shown up. He placed a coffee on her desk and sat opposite her. "How was the morning?" Camille looked at him. Then she told him everything. She told the story the way she told everything, plainly, in order, without unnecessary drama. The blue lights on Route 9, Kessler approaching the window, the wait beside her own vehicle, the backup call for a simple plate check, the sound of handcuffs closing around Darius's wrists, the long wait while dispatch confirmed what Camille had already told the officer. The words, "free to go," spoken as though she and Darius had been nothing more than an inconvenience Kessler was finally finished dealing with. As Camille spoke, Gideon's face slowly hardened, not dramatically. It was simply the quiet tightening of a man who was listening carefully and did not like what he was hearing. When she finished, silence settled over the office. "You have the footage?" he asked. "Every second of it." Gideon nodded and started to speak. Camille lifted one hand. "There's more." She opened the top drawer of her desk and removed a thick folder with worn edges. She had been carrying it since before the election. During transition briefings, Camille had quietly requested access to departmental complaint records. She had spent several nights at her kitchen table, reading them while Darius slept. She slid the folder toward Gideon. "Travis Kessler," she said. 11 misconduct complaints over the last 10 years. Racially charged traffic stops. Excessive force. Intimidation. She paused. Not one complaint went anywhere. Not one was properly investigated. Another pause. Every one of them was buried by Sheriff Wade Barlow. Gideon opened the folder. His eyes moved down the first page. "There was a man named Calvin Price," Camille continued. 67 years old. He filed a complaint against Kessler several years ago. 2 weeks later, he was arrested on charges that were never proven and never properly explained. He spent 4 months in county jail. Then the charges vanished. I was quietly released. Camille stopped. He died 8 months later. Gideon looked up. Camille held his gaze. "I'm not filing a personal complaint," she said. "I'm building a case, a real case, with subpoena power and the full weight of this office behind it. I want Kessler, and I want the man who has been protecting him." Gideon remained silent. He looked down again, turned another page. Then he placed his coffee on the desk with a quiet, deliberate click. "Tell me where to start." Not long after, Camille took office. Her assistant informed her that Sheriff Wade Barlow had arrived. Camille was not surprised. Nobody had warned her he was coming. Nobody needed to. Men like Wade Barlow followed predictable patterns. They watched, waited long enough to appear relaxed, then arrived with coffee and a smile, and called the visit a courtesy. "Send him in," Camille said. She did not stand. Wade Barlow was 61. He filled the doorway with the physical confidence of a man who had spent 16 years being the most powerful person in almost every room he entered. Tall, heavy through the shoulders, silver hair neatly combed back, a smile that had probably charmed county commissioners more times than Camille could count. He carried 2 cups of coffee from the courthouse cafe, one in each hand, held forward, almost like a peace offering. "District Attorney Hartwell," he said, warm as a Sunday sermon. "Thought I'd come introduce myself properly. I know things got off to a rocky start." "Sheriff Barlow." Camille gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. "Sit down." Hassat placed one coffee in front of Camille, kept the other. His eyes traveled around the room, the stacked boxes, bare walls, degrees still resting unhung against the baseboard. He nodded approvingly, almost like a man inspecting property he already considered his own, still getting settled in. "Big transition." "I'm getting there," Camille said. "Good, good." Barlow crossed one leg over the other and wrapped his hands around his coffee. "I want to start by saying what happened with Officer Kessler was unfortunate. A clerical error in our dispatch system that never should have reached the field." He slowly shook his head, performing regret. "I've already spoken to the people responsible. You and your husband should never have been put through that. I sincerely mean that." Camille watched him. "I appreciate you saying so." "Of course," he smiled. "Now, I know you are new to this office, and I know you came back from Atlanta, so maybe some of the, let's call it the texture of how things work here in Harrow County, is still unfamiliar." He took a sip of coffee. "Our department and the district attorney's office have always enjoyed a very strong working relationship. Cooperative. That relationship is what keeps the county running smoothly, keeps people safe." He paused. "I'd hate to see anything disrupt that, especially at the beginning of a new administration." There it was. Not technically a threat. Men like Wade Barlow were too careful to make explicit threats. It was simply a description of the world as he believed it worked. A reminder that the machinery of Harrow County had been operating long before Camille arrived and would continue operating, regardless of how she chose to interact with it. Camille picked up the coffee, took one measured sip, then set it down. "I completely agree. A strong, working relationship between our offices is essential. The people of this county deserve nothing less." Barlow's smile widened. He liked that answer. It was exactly the answer he had expected. "I think we're going to get along just fine." He remained for a short while, and eventually left with his easy smile intact. The door had barely closed when Gideon appeared from the adjoining office. He looked at Camille. "He came here to size me up," she said. "I know." Gideon walked toward the desk, carrying a folder significantly thicker than before. "While he was sizing you up, I was pulling records." He placed the folder down and turned it toward her. 4 of Kessler's 11 buried complainants had encounters with the sheriff's department within 90 days of filing their complaints. Traffic stops, arrests, citations that eventually went nowhere, but stayed in the system long enough to hurt them. He tapped the top page. "That isn't coincidence. It's a pattern." Barlow wasn't only protecting Kessler. "I was sending a message to anyone who tried to speak." Camille looked down at the documents. Names, records, evidence. The quiet paper trail of a man who had spent 16 years using institutional power against ordinary people whose only offense had been refusing to stay silent. She remembered Barlow's smile, his coffee, his careful warmth. I'd hate to see anything disrupt that. Camille closed the folder. Good. Gideon continued looking at his files. Let him underestimate you. A few days later, Camille found the first public attack on the front page of the Harrow County Courier. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing her robe, with coffee cooling beside her. Darius was upstairs. The house was quiet. As she normally did, Camille opened the newspaper and began with the front page. Then she saw the headline, New Day's Traffic Stop, Misunderstanding or Political Move. She lowered her coffee. She read the article once without stopping, then again, more slowly. The way she read evidence. The story was roughly 400 words and credited to a staff reporter, but much of its information came from an unnamed senior law enforcement official with direct knowledge of the incident. The writing was careful. There were no obvious lies. No direct accusation Camille could easily challenge. Only framing. The slow, practiced art of telling a story sideways. Her traffic stop was described as a routine response to an incorrect system alert that had been discovered and resolved at the scene. Kessler was not identified. The clerical error received only passing mention, as though it were an insignificant detail, rather than the entire reason the encounter had happened. Darius being handcuffed beside Route 9 was not mentioned at all. Instead, the article repeatedly questioned whether the new district attorney, who had been personally involved in the event, might use the resources of her office to pursue what unnamed officials were already describing privately as a personal grievance against the sheriff's department. No source was identified by name. None needed to be. The suggestion had already been planted, clean, deep, like a splinter beneath the skin. Sources close to the department reportedly hoped that the new administration would focus on maintaining cooperative relationships with local law enforcement, rather than allowing a resolved misunderstanding to distract from more serious responsibilities. Camille folded the newspaper, then folded it again. She placed it on the table and stared at it briefly. Then she got dressed and went to work. Her phone began receiving calls from county commission offices. Gideon handled several. Then he appeared in Camille's doorway. Warren Lockridge. Commissioner Warren Lockridge was 63 and had held a seat on the Harrow County Commission for 14 years. He carried the particular confidence of a man who had rarely faced a serious challenge for anything he wanted. I was also a longtime friend of Sheriff Wade Barlow, a relationship that had repeatedly coincided with favorable budget decisions for the sheriff's department. He wasted no time. Camille, can I call you Camille? I'm going to be straightforward because I think you're a smart woman, and smart people appreciate honesty. His voice was smooth, almost friendly. The people of this county voted for you because they wanted a strong district attorney, someone competent, someone focused. What they didn't vote for was drama. They didn't vote for a war between your office and the sheriff's department. Commissioner Lockridge, I appreciate the call. What I'm saying is that there are ways to handle things quietly that serve everyone better than turning them into a public spectacle. Whatever happened on that road is over. It was a mistake. It was corrected. Sometimes the smartest thing a new office holder can do is recognize when it's time to let something go. Spectacle. The word remained suspended between them like something he had placed there intentionally. I'll keep that in mind, Camille replied. Thank you for calling. She ended the call. Gideon remained in the doorway. I had heard enough. The story came from inside the department, he said. I confirmed it. The language in the newspaper article matches internal talking points circulated through department email. He paused. Barlow sat in this office drinking coffee and talking to you about cooperation. Then his department fed a narrative to the press. Camille looked toward the folded newspaper on her desk. She could no longer see the headline clearly from where she sat, but she could see it perfectly in her mind. Misunderstanding or political move. She opened a desk drawer, placed the newspaper inside, closed it. They wanted her rattled. They wanted her calculating the price of continuing. They wanted her to see the machinery. They were willing to turn against her and quietly decide the fight was not worth the cost. Camille looked at Gideon. Keep pulling. Soon afterward, Gideon drove across town to a quiet neighborhood of modest homes and carefully maintained yards, the kind of place where neighbors knew one another and paid attention when something unusual happened. He found Tessa Munro's address. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. Lights glowed inside. Gideon knocked twice. Tessa answered wearing part of her uniform trousers, an undershirt. Her badge clipped at her hip. She was 34, with sharp, tired eyes and the guarded posture of someone who had known this visit was coming and had spent days deciding what she would do when it arrived. She looked at Gideon. He looked back. Mr. Shaw. Deputy Munro, I appreciate you opening the door. Tessa studied him, then stepped aside. They sat at her kitchen table. She did not offer coffee. She folded her hands and spoke immediately, with the directness of someone who had rehearsed the conversation repeatedly. I know why you're here, and before you say anything, I need you to understand something. I have a daughter. She's 7. I pay the mortgage on this house by myself, and I have 11 years in that department. 11 years I worked for, fought for, held on to through things you don't even know about. She held his gaze. So whatever you're about to ask me, understand what it costs. Gideon nodded slowly. I understand. I don't think you do. Maybe not completely, he admitted. But I've watched enough people in your position to know that what you're describing is real. The fear is real. The cost of speaking is real. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise. Tessa looked down. I shouldn't have been there that morning. It was Kessler's stop. Backup wasn't necessary. We both know that. She paused. When I arrived and saw Miss Hartwell standing there, I knew immediately who she was. Everybody in the department knew. She slowly exhaled. I tried to say something to Kessler. You saw what happened. I saw, Gideon said. He's been doing things like that as long as I've been on the force. Longer. Her jaw tightened. Stops that make no sense. People treated like criminals because they were black and happened to be driving on the wrong road at the wrong moment. I've watched it happen. I've been backup on stops where there was no reason for backup. She lifted her eyes, and every time someone tried to complain, nothing happened. You know why? Because Barlow made sure nothing happened. Every time. Gideon allowed silence to remain for a moment. Then he spoke. There was a man named Calvin Price, 67 years old, retired postal worker, lived on the same street most of his life. Kessler pulled him over a few blocks from his own home. No valid reason. Held him on the side of the road for 40 minutes. Gideon's voice remained level. Mr. Price filed a complaint. He did everything correctly. In writing. Followed up twice. 2 weeks later, he was arrested. Possession charges that were never proven and never properly explained. He spent 4 months in county jail. Then the charges quietly disappeared. Gideon paused. I was released. He died months later from heart failure. But his daughter will tell you he wasn't the same man when he came home. Something broke in him during those 4 months, and it never healed. The kitchen became completely silent. Tessa stared at the table. Her hands had separated. Her fingertips pressed against the wood, as though she needed something solid beneath them. I didn't know all of that, she said quietly. I knew about the complaint. I didn't know what happened afterward. Most people didn't, Gideon replied. That was the point. He did not push her. He did not explain what he wanted, did not describe the case, did not ask for anything. He simply allowed Calvin Price's story to remain in the room between them. Truth sometimes did its best work when nobody tried to decorate it. Eventually, Gideon stood and picked up his jacket. "I appreciate your time, Deputy Monroe." Tessa remained seated. As Gideon reached the hallway, she spoke. "Mr. Shaw." He stopped. She looked up. Her eyes were steady, but something behind them had changed. A door that had been locked tightly for years had opened slightly. "Give me some time." Gideon nodded once, then left. Later, Gideon entered Camille's office without knocking and turned his laptop toward her. That meant whatever he had found mattered. Camille watched the video twice. The footage was shaky, recorded through the passenger window of a vehicle at an angle, but it was clear enough. A black man wearing a minister's collar stood beside a two-lane road, both hands visible, his voice controlled. Behind him, a Harrow County Sheriff's cruiser flashed its lights, and there was Travis Kessler, badge Orshosan, unmistakable, moving around the scene, as though the road belonged to him. The traffic stop lasted 31 minutes. 31 minutes, because Kessler claimed he could not clearly read a license plate. 31 minutes of a 58-year-old pastor, standing on the shoulder while Kessler repeatedly ran checks. Every check came back clean. A church deacon riding in the passenger seat had begun recording several minutes into the stop. By the time Camille saw the video, it had already been shared thousands of times on local social media. "That's Reverend Isaiah Colson," Gideon said, "pastor of Grace Tabernacle Baptist. He's been in this county for 30 years. Camille watched the video again. She watched Kessler move around Reverend Colson. Unhurried, dismissive, deliberately slow. She watched Reverend Colson stand there, composed, patient, burning underneath. Camille knew that posture. She had stood in exactly the same position. "Has he filed anything?" she asked. "Not yet. From what I can tell, he went straight home afterward. His congregation is furious. The video is already getting attention from Atlanta television stations." Camille closed the laptop. She stood and smoothed her jacket. "Get me his number." Reverend Isaiah Colson answered quickly. His voice was deep and measured, the voice of a man shaped by decades of standing before rooms full of people who needed steadiness. But beneath the composure, Camille heard something else, the particular exhaustion of someone who had endured humiliation and was still carrying it. She introduced herself. A brief silence followed. "I know who you are, District Attorney Hartwell," he said. "Everybody in this county does. Then you know why I'm calling." Another pause, shorter. "I figured someone would eventually." Camille spoke directly. She explained the difference between filing a complaint with the sheriff's department and filing one directly with the district attorney's office. A complaint submitted to the sheriff's department could be received, logged, then quietly made to disappear. A complaint filed with Camille's office would enter the official public record. Wade Barlow could not suppress it, could not lose it. It would either be investigated properly, or the failure to investigate it would itself become part of the record. She told him there had already been 11 misconduct complaints against Kessler. She did not tell him that everyone had been buried. She did not need to. The silence on the other end suggested he already understood. "There's something else," Camille said. "I need you to understand what filing your complaint would mean. Not only for you, for everyone who complained before you and received nothing. You would be the first formal complaint filed through this office. The first one they can't touch." Reverend Colson remained quiet. Then he spoke. "My mother called after she saw the video." He paused. "She told me she was proud of me for staying calm, but she was crying while she said it. She didn't think I could hear." His voice dropped. "I heard." "I know," Camille said softly. "When do I come in?" Reverend Colson arrived at the district attorney's office wearing his Sunday suit, a small detail that told Camille exactly how seriously he regarded what he was about to do. Gideon carefully walked him through the process. Reverend Colson gave his complete account, the reason Kessler claimed for stopping him, the repeated checks, the 31-minute detention, the deacon's video. Then he signed the formal complaint in a clear, firm hand. Gideon immediately entered it into the official records of the Harrow County District Attorney's Office. Camille shook Reverend Colson's hand at the door. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now it exists," she said. "Officially, permanently, and nobody can make it disappear." She watched him walk toward the elevator. Then she turned back toward the office. Gideon was already adding Colson's complaint to the growing case file. Camille looked at the stack. Documents, photographs, names, the stories of people who had tried to speak and had been silenced. The file was becoming heavier every day. Good. Eventually, Gideon submitted their formal filing to the State Law Enforcement Certification Board. It was 43 pages long. It contained Reverend Colson's complaint, 3 additional sworn statements from complainants Gideon had located and interviewed, Camille's own sworn account of the Route 9 traffic stop, her video recording entered as Exhibit A, and a structured summary of Kessler's 11-year misconduct history, with documentation showing how complaints had been suppressed. 43 pages, every claim sourced, every allegation supported. Built the same way Camille had built every serious case in her career. Not to impress, to withstand. News outlets quickly picked up the filing. Several Atlanta stations began covering the story. A coalition of black pastors, including Reverend Colson, organized a prayer vigil outside the Harrow County Courthouse. Camille watched footage on her office computer. Dozens of people stood on the courthouse steps in the cooling Georgia air. Candles burned. Voices rose. Older women in church hats, men with gray hair at their temples, and Camille understood without anyone explaining it. For many of them, the vigil was not only about Travis Kessler, it was about every stop, every humiliation, every complaint they had filed, every complaint they had almost filed, every complaint they had talked themselves out of filing because they already knew where it would end. Camille sat with that thought. Then she shut down her computer, gathered her things, and went home. Darius had cooked, not reheated food, not ordered takeout. Cooked chicken and rice, green beans from the small garden behind their house, cornbread still warm when Camille entered the kitchen. He had set the table properly. Good placemats, candles they usually reserved for special occasions. Darius stood at the stove and looked at Camille the same way he had looked at her for 18 years, as if she were someone worth showing up for. "Sit down," he said. "Eat something that didn't come from a vending machine." Camille sat, sha'ate, for one evening. She allowed herself to be fully present. The food, the candles, Darius talking about his day, things that were normal, warm, untouched by misconduct files, depositions, political pressure, and the exhausting weight of institutional corruption. For one entire evening, Camille allowed herself to believe that perhaps the hardest part was already behind them. "It's almost over," Darius said. It was not a question. Camille looked across the table. Almost. He lifted his glass. She lifted hers. They touched glasses above the candlelight, like two people who had earned that small moment. That night, Camille slept better than she had in weeks. Then the next blow arrived. Camille was at her desk reviewing press coverage when her direct phone rang. The caller identified herself as a representative of the Georgia State Attorney General's office. Camille set down her coffee. The representative's voice was clipped and professional. A formal complaint had been submitted against Camille. Sheriff Wade Barlow had filed it jointly with 3 members of the Harrow County Commission. The complaint alleged that District Attorney Camille Hartwell had abused the authority of her office in pursuit of a personal vendetta arising from her own traffic stop. It alleged that she had improperly used prosecutorial resources for personal purposes. It claimed her actions had created a hostile working relationship with the sheriff's department and threatened public safety throughout the county. The Attorney General's office was required to acknowledge the complaint and begin a preliminary inquiry. The representative finished explaining the process. "Do you have any immediate response?" "No," Camille said. "Not at this time." She ended the call, then sat completely still. She understood immediately what Barlow had done. The complaint did not need to succeed. It did not need to prove anything. It only needed to exist long enough for the State Certification Board to hesitate. And hesitation was all Barlow needed. If the board paused its review, Travis Kessler could return to his uniform, return to Route 9. Soon afterward, the Certification Board announced that it was suspending its review of Kessler's case until the inquiry into Camille's conduct had been resolved. Camille read the announcement on her phone at the kitchen table. Then she opened the Harrow County Courier's website. A photograph dominated the page. Kessler and Barlow standing outside the sheriff's department, both in uniform, both smiling, shaking hands like men who believed they had just won something. They thought they had. Camille placed the phone face down. She stared toward the wall, outside the kitchen window. The Georgia morning was gray and cold, and for the first time since the traffic stop on Route 9, Camille looked like someone who might not win. For several days afterward, she sat in her office with files open and a pen in her hand. She appeared to be working, but Gideon had known her long enough to recognize the difference between Camille Hartwell thinking and Camille Hartwell grinding. This was grinding. She was running the same calculation repeatedly and reaching the same inadequate answer. Gideon left her alone. He had learned when to do that. Then Camille's assistant appeared. "There's someone in the lobby asking to see the district attorney. No appointment. Wouldn't say why. Only gave a name. Tessa Monroe." Camille looked up. "Send her in." Tessa entered alone. No uniform. Civilian clothes. A gray jacket over dark jeans. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was moving quickly before fear could persuade her to reverse it. She closed the office door without being asked, sat opposite Camille, and placed a plain manila folder on the desk. Nothing was written on the outside. Tessa kept one hand flat over the folder for a few seconds, as though giving herself one final opportunity to take it back and leave. Then she pushed it toward Camille. Camille opened it. Inside was a printed email chain, 4 pages. The messages were almost 2 years old. They had been sent using the sheriff department's official email server. The sender of the first message was Wade Barlow. The recipient was Sergeant Curtis Dane, supervisor of the department's Internal Records Division. Camille read slowly. She did not rush. The emails documented a direct order from Barlow, instructing Dane to remove a misconduct complaint from the active review queue. He told Dane to transfer it into an archive folder that, in Barlow's own words, doesn't get looked at. The complaint had been filed by a black woman named Renee Booker. She had been stopped, detained, and subjected to an invasive search of her vehicle without probable cause. The officer named in her complaint was Travis Kessler. Barlow's language was not careful. These were not the words of a man who believed anyone outside his own department would ever read them. They were contemptuous, dismissive. He referred to Renee in language that caused Camille's jaw to tighten the first time she read it. and tighten more the second. The emails were authentic, time-stamped, sent from official department accounts. There was no ambiguity, no alternative interpretation, no believable way to explain them away. They were exactly what they appeared to be. Camille carefully lowered the last page, then looked at Tessa. The deputy sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her shoulders curved slightly forward, like someone waiting for impact. Dark circles beneath her eyes suggested she had not slept much while deciding whether to come. "How did you find these?" "I was archiving old department communications," Tessa said. "Standard rotation. We periodically move files from the active server into long-term storage." Her voice was steady, but thin, like wire pulled tight. "I almost moved the messages without opening them. Something made me read them." She paused. "I kept thinking about the man Gideon told me about, the one who filed a complaint and ended up in jail." "Calvin Price," Camille said. "I kept thinking, what if the next person is someone I know? What if it already is someone I know, and I just don't realize it?" Tessa's jaw shifted. "I printed them and brought them here because I couldn't think of anything else to do." Camille studied her. "You know what you just did." Tessa held her gaze. "I know. You understand what this could mean for you inside that department." "I know what it means." She said it quietly, but there was no hesitation in the words. "I've known what that department was for a long time. I kept telling myself it wasn't my problem to fix." She briefly lowered her eyes. "Turns out I was wrong." Camille looked again at the printed emails. 4 pages. Wade Barlow, in his own words, on an official department server, ordering someone to bury a complaint against Travis Kessler, the same officer who had placed Darius in handcuffs beside Route 9. Camille stood, walked to the adjoining office door, opened it. "Gideon." He appeared almost immediately. One look at her face told him enough. "Get the State Attorney General's office on the phone," Camille said, "and schedule a meeting with our contacts at the Georgia Department of Justice." Gideon looked at the folder, then Tessa, then Camille. He nodded and reached for his phone. When Tessa eventually left, Camille walked her personally to the door, not simply as a courtesy. She wanted Tessa to understand in some tangible way that she was no longer alone. At the threshold, Camille shook her hand and held it slightly longer than usual. "Don't talk to anyone inside the department about this," Camille said quietly. "Not yet. Not until we tell you it's time." Tessa nodded. She looked steadier as she walked away. That mattered. Camille returned to her office. Gideon was already moving. He had pushed the chairs away from the conference table and spread documents across its entire length. Printed records, tabbed folders, a legal pad covered in careful handwriting, several manila envelopes. Gideon stood in the middle of it all with his reading glasses on, jacket removed, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Camille stood beside the table. "Walk me through it." Gideon started at one end. The first section is complaint history. All 11 buried complaints involving Kessler were arranged chronologically. Each included a record showing exactly how it had been processed, or more accurately, not processed. Missing acknowledgement signatures, review dates entered into the system and never followed up. Complaint files moved into archive folders only days after they were opened. The same archive area Barlow referenced in the email to Sergeant Dane. "It's the same mechanism every time," Gideon said. "Different complaints, different victims, different years. Same process. Flag it, move it, bury it. Clean enough that someone outside the department might never call it intentional. Unless they saw all 11 together," Camille said, "which nobody ever did. Until now," Gideon replied. "Until now." He moved to the next section. The second section is retaliation. 4 people who had complained about Kessler later faced law enforcement action within 90 days. Gideon had traced every case forward from the date the original complaint was filed. Stops, citations, one arrest based on charges later dismissed without explanation. In every case, the officers involved ultimately reported either to Kessler or Sergeant Dane. The connection was not always perfectly straight, but it was always there. "We cannot prove Barlow personally ordered every retaliation," Gideon said. "But we don't have to. The pattern itself is evidence." 11 complaints, 4 retaliations, 0 completed investigations. That isn't negligence. That's policy. Camille nodded. Then she reached the third section. 2 documents lay beside each other. One contained campaign finance records for the 3 commissioners who had signed Barlow's complaint against Camille. The other showed county contracts awarded through the sheriff department's operating budget. Gideon let her read before explaining. 2 of the 3 commissioners had received significant campaign contributions from 2 private contractors. Those same contractors held active service agreements with the county, contracts routed through the sheriff department's budget authority. The individual amounts were not enormous. They did not need to be. What mattered was consistency. Contribution cycles followed a regular pattern. Money arrived before commission votes, involving departmental funding. "They aren't just Barlow's allies," Camille said. "They're his investors." Gideon nodded. "And he's their return." Camille moved toward the final document, a sworn and notarized affidavit signed by Marjorie Vance, a retired Harrow County Sheriff's Department administrator. She had worked in the records division for 19 years before taking early retirement. Camille read the affidavit straight through. Marjorie stated, under oath, that while she worked at the department, Sheriff Wade Barlow had directly ordered her to remove and physically destroy documentation connected to a misconduct complaint. She had obeyed because she feared losing her job. She had regretted it ever since. When Gideon found her and explained the investigation, she agreed to sign the affidavit. Camille lowered the page, then stood at the end of the table and looked at everything spread before her. Weeks of work, carefully constructed, thoroughly sourced, solid where it needed to be solid. Barlow had filed his complaint against Camille intending to derail her investigation. Instead, he had placed the conflict directly onto the state record. That gave Camille the legal mechanism to provide a counter-disclosure directly to state authorities. Barlow had opened the door himself. Gideon had built everything waiting behind it. Camille straightened one document, aligned another, then looked across the table at Gideon. "File it." The state's announcement arrived soon afterward. Camille was sitting in a budget meeting when Gideon knocked and immediately opened the door. He only did that when something could not wait. He held up his phone. Camille read the screen. Her expression remained neutral. "Give me 10 minutes, she told everyone in the room. Then she returned to her office with Gideon. The Georgia Department of Justice had released a formal statement. 2 paragraphs, written in the flat. Precise language government institutions often use when every unnecessary word has been removed. The department had received a counter-disclosure from the Harrow County District Attorney's Office containing documented evidence of systemic misconduct, suppression of complaints, and potential criminal obstruction inside the Harrow County Sheriff's Department. After reviewing the materials, the Department of Justice was opening a formal investigation. All relevant personnel were required to cooperate fully. Any attempt to obstruct the investigation would be treated as a separate criminal matter. Gideon read the statement aloud inside Camille's office. She had already read it more than once on her phone, but hearing the words spoken inside the office she had occupied for only a short time, in the county she had returned home to change, made the announcement feel real in a way a screen could not. When Gideon finished, silence remained for a moment. Then Camille asked, "What is the sheriff's department saying?" "Nothing publicly, but I have two sources who say Barlow called an all-hands meeting. It didn't last long before people started walking out. The consequences began appearing quickly. The State Law Enforcement Certification Board, which had suspended its review of Kessler, reversed that decision and resumed the proceedings. The Attorney General's office withdrew its preliminary inquiry into Camille's conduct. No explanation was given. None was necessary. And Travis Kessler, badge number 1147, 20 years in law enforcement, the man who had placed Darius Hartwell in handcuffs on Route 9 without a moment of hesitation, was placed on administrative leave. It was the first disciplinary action of his 20-year career. Gideon brought to Camille the memorandum confirming it. She read the document, then placed it inside the case file. She did not celebrate, not because she was not satisfied. She was. But satisfaction was not the same thing as finished. There was still work ahead. There would always be work ahead. That was the nature of the life she had chosen. The county commissioners moved quickly once state investigators became involved. The particular speed of men who could read a room and had suddenly realized the entire room had changed. Commissioner Warren Lockridge, the man who had personally called Camille to suggest she let the matter go, the man who had described the investigation as a spectacle, released a public statement expressing his complete confidence in the district attorney's office. He also announced his commitment to accountability in county law enforcement. The statement did not mention his earlier phone call. It did not mention the word spectacle. The other commissioners, who had signed Barlow's complaint against Camille, issued similar statements. Each was carefully written to make it sound as though they had always stood on the correct side of the issue. Camille read every statement, then filed them away. No comment. Inside the sheriff's department, the atmosphere changed immediately. Senior deputies and sergeants who had built careers inside Barlow's system went quiet. People who had watched complaints disappear and said nothing began closing their doors. Conversations dropped to whispers. Tessa Monroe noticed the change the moment she entered the building. Since delivering the email chain to Camille, she had come to work every day carrying the low-level dread of someone waiting for retaliation. But suddenly, nobody approached her. Nobody stared. Nobody said anything. The department's old warning system had stopped functioning, because the people who had operated it were now trying to save themselves. Elsewhere, inside the building, Wade Barlow sat alone behind his closed office door. His phones rang repeatedly. His desk line, his cell phone. Commissioners, attorneys, county officials, who had enjoyed his hospitality for 16 years and were now calculating exactly how far away from him they needed to stand before the ground collapsed. Barlow answered none of them. He simply sat behind the desk in the office he had occupied for 16 years. Inside the building, he had treated like personal property, and listened to the phone ring. Several weeks into the state investigation, Camille asked Darius to drive Route 9 with her. He did not ask why. He simply picked up the keys. Georgia looked almost painted that afternoon. A wide, pale blue sky. Trees burning orange and red on either side of the highway. Warm light pouring low through the windshield. Darius drove easily, with one hand on the steering wheel and the radio playing softly. The Escalade moved smoothly over the same asphalt. It had traveled weeks earlier, under entirely different circumstances. For a while, neither of them spoke. They did not need to. 18 years of marriage had given them a comfortable language of silence, the kind where nothing being said meant peace rather than avoidance. Camille watched Harrove County pass outside her window. Fields, churches, hand-painted signs outside small businesses. She had grown up along this road, ridden a school bus down sections of it every morning for 12 years. She had left for Atlanta at 22 with a scholarship, one suitcase, and a quiet belief that someday she would return, and that coming home would mean something. She was back, and it meant something. Eventually, the place appeared ahead, a long gravel shoulder beside a rusted guardrail, a gap between the trees, a stretch of road that looked like every other section of Route 9. Nothing special. Unless you knew what had happened there, Darius knew. Without Camille saying anything, he eased off the accelerator. The Escalade drifted toward the shoulder, then rolled to a stop on the same gravel where blue lights had once spun behind them, and an officer, carrying a badge and a terrible decision, had walked toward their car. Darius shut off the engine. They sat quietly. Wind moved through the trees. Farther down the road, a crow called twice. Then silence. The rusted guardrail stood ahead. Ordinary, just another piece of road. Darius stared forward. "You all right?" "Yeah." Camille waited, then said, "I need to tell you something." Darius turned toward her. Camille told him about Odessa Colson. Odessa was 79, Reverend Isaiah Colson's mother. She had come to Camille's office without telling her son why. She had followed the news coverage, seen the filing, seen the prayer vigil, heard Camille's public statements. Then she put on her good coat, drove herself downtown, and asked the receptionist whether she could speak directly with District Attorney Hartwell. Camille had come into the lobby herself. Odessa was a small woman, neatly dressed, silver hair cut close, her hands folded over a purse resting in her lap, as though she were sitting inside church. She possessed the particular stillness of someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to put it down. Odessa told Camille that 11 years earlier, Travis Kessler had stopped her alone on Route 9 late at night. She had been returning home from a church board meeting, the same church her son now pastored. The stop lasted more than 40 minutes. No citation was issued. No criminal charge was filed. The reason Kessler gave for the stop changed twice. What happened during those 40 minutes had never left her. Odessa had never told her son, never told her husband, who later died, never told another living person. She had considered filing a complaint, then convinced herself not to, because she already understood what would happen. The way black women of her generation in counties like Harrove often understood without needing anyone to explain it. She came to Camille because she needed someone with enough power to finally do something to know that her story existed. Camille entered Odessa's statement into the official state record. Odessa Colson, 79 years old, documented, permanent. Her story could no longer be buried. Darius remained silent for a long while after Camille finished. The light outside had shifted as she spoke, gold turning toward amber, longer shadows reaching across the gravel shoulder, across the old guardrail, across Route 9. Darius reached over the center console, took Camille's hand. His grip was warm, solid. It communicated everything he did not say. Camille held on. Eventually, Darius restarted the Escalade. He guided them back onto Route 9, toward home. Neither spoke for the rest of the drive. Nothing else needed to be said. The consequences continued unfolding over the following weeks, one after another, like dominoes falling in slow motion. Travis Kessler's decertification hearing before the State Law Enforcement Certification Board lasted 2 days. Camille did not attend. She did not need to. The 43-page filing, the video recordings, sworn statements, the email chain, Marjorie Vance's affidavit. The evidence spoke for itself, the way good evidence always does when it has been built carefully, honestly, and without shortcuts. The board's decision was unanimous. Travis Kessler was formally decertified. He could never again serve as a law enforcement officer anywhere in the state of Georgia. Not in Harrow County. Not anywhere. 20 years of carrying a badge, and everything he believed that badge entitled him to. Gone. Permanently. Irreversibly. Criminal charges followed. Camille's office filed 2 counts of civil rights violations under state law. The complete evidentiary record accompanied the charges. Kessler hired an attorney. After reviewing the evidence, the attorney apparently told his client the truth about what the case meant. They wanted to negotiate a plea. Camille allowed Gideon to handle the discussions. She trusted him completely. She also understood something about herself. Watching the man who had placed her husband in handcuffs beside Route 9 negotiate his way out of a trial would require a level of emotional detachment she was not certain she could maintain while sitting across from him. Eventually, Kessler entered the plea in the Harrow County Courthouse, the same building Camille had once rushed toward with gravel dust still on her tires. 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a formal written public apology entered permanently into the court record. Camille read the apology after it was filed. 2 paragraphs, carefully drafted by lawyers. Minimal. It did not say nearly enough, but it existed. On the record, his name beneath it, his signature. Permanent. That was something. Wade Barlow's downfall was louder and faster, though Camille had privately expected it for some time. Once the complete dossier reached state authorities, the Department of Justice investigation moved quickly. The obstruction allegations were not complicated. The emails were authentic. The affidavit was strong. Marjorie Vance was a credible witness with nothing left to fear. 4 criminal counts followed. Obstruction of justice, official misconduct. The indictment became public before Barlow could control the story. He announced that he would not seek another term. Soon afterward, he resigned from the sheriff's office. His resignation statement was so short and so empty of accountability that it sounded like a man who still could not quite believe his 16 years of power had actually ended. Commissioner Warren Lockridge, the man who had called Camille and told her to let the matter go, the man who had used the word spectacle like a warning, also decided not to run again. He announced his retirement from public life in a brief statement, mentioning his family and health. He said nothing about Harrow County, under the pressure of an active state investigation, and a public that had followed the case closely. The county commission unanimously established an independent civilian review board for the sheriff's department. It was one of the reforms Camille had championed during her campaign. Back when people called her idealistic, the vote was unanimous. Not long after Barlow's resignation, Tessa Monroe was promoted to lieutenant. She had been passed over for the position twice during the previous 3 years. The transitional sheriff, appointed after Barlow, reviewed Tessa's record, reviewed what she had done, and approved the promotion. Tessa called Gideon when she learned. Gideon told Camille. Camille sat quietly for a moment. Something warm and uncomplicated moved through her chest. Later, the coalition of pastors organized a community cookout behind Grace Tabernacle Baptist. It was not a formal event. No podium, no television cameras, no speeches, only long tables, good food, and the particular ease of a community that had held its breath for too long and had finally been given permission to exhale. Camille moved slowly through the crowd, stopping often. She spoke with people she had known most of her life, people she had only recently met, and people whose names she recognized from case files, names that, for years, had been attached to complaints, retaliation, setbacks, quiet humiliation. Now those names belonged again to real people, standing in sunlight, eating potato salad, laughing at something their grandchildren had done. Near the far end of the yard, Reverend Isaiah Colson found Camille. I was smiling broadly. He looked lighter, like a man who had set down something he had carried for too long. I introduced the small woman beside him simply. My mother. Odessa Colson wore a burgundy coat. Her silver hair was cropped close. Her hands rested neatly in front of her. She looked at Camille for a long moment, studying her, taking her in. Then she reached forward and took both of Camille's hands. Her grip was stronger than Camille expected. I always knew somebody would come back, Odessa said. Camille understood immediately. Not simply someone from Atlanta. Someone from here. Someone who had grown up knowing exactly what Harrove County could do to a person. Someone who had left, built something powerful, then returned and used that power. Camille felt her throat tighten. She held Odessa's hands and nodded. "I'm glad it was you," Odessa said. Later, Camille stood near the edge of the yard where the grass met the trees. Across the lawn, Darius was laughing at something Reverend Colson had said, his head tilted back, completely unguarded. Warm evening, light stretched long shadows across the grass. The air smelled of wood smoke and good food, and of the particular relief that settles over people when something difficult has finally been resolved. Camille allowed herself to feel it. Not exactly triumph, not exactly relief. Something quieter, more permanent. Something bent had been made straighter, not completely. There would be more work, more problems, more battles. She had not fixed everything. Camille knew better than to believe that one investigation, one filing, one set of consequences, however justified, however earned, could undo what decades of people looking the other way had created. The work did not end here, but something real had happened in Harrove County, something that could not be undone. 11 complaints that had once been buried were now permanently documented. A man who had spent 20 years believing his badge made him untouchable had learned otherwise. A 79-year-old woman who had carried her story alone for 11 years had driven herself to the courthouse because she finally believed someone with power might listen. Her story existed now, officially, permanently. That was not nothing. That was everything. Camille watched Darius laughing across the yard. She watched the last warm light settle over the Georgia hills, and for the first time she understood fully not only what she had won, but what she had built. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. On the screen, I've selected 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.